They said the war would end the way all wars ended in the north, with mud, with hunger, with the slow grind of siege engines chewing a city's bones until the stones themselves begged for mercy. They were wrong, because the walls of Carthmere were never breached. No tower fell, no gate was burned, not a single ram kissed the oak of the iron mouth. And yet the banners of Carthmere were lowered all the same. Not by steel, by glass, by a pact written in dragon breath and reflected secrets, and by riders who learned to train mirror-scaled worms to steal a kingdom's thoughts right out of its throat. Listen closely, because this is the tale the chroniclers tried to bury under respectable lies. This is the tale of the Glass-Wyrm Pact, and how a war was won without a siege. It began, as so many calamities do, with a marriage. In the year of the split comet, King Odrin of Veylmoor offered his only daughter, Eowyn, to the rival throne of Carthmere. Not from love, not from hope, from fear. Veylmoor was a river kingdom, all reeds and barges, its wealth floating on the current like fat geese. Carthmere was stone and iron, a fortress realm whose mines fed half the continent. Between them lay the grey marches, a stretch of stubborn hills where old wars slept in shallow graves. For 3 generations, the marches had been quiet. Then the comet came, and with it, men began to dream of fire. Carthmere's new ruler, Queen Maerwynn the Tall, had taken the throne with the kind of speed that makes courtiers choke on their wine. Her husband died in a hunting accident, her brother died of a fever, and her counselors began to speak only when spoken to. She was a woman carved from winter, and in her eyes there lived a patience that frightened even those who loved her. When Maerwynn demanded Eowyn's hand, Odrin agreed. He sent his daughter north with a dowry of river gold and silk, and he told himself that peace was worth any price. But Eowyn never reached Carthmere. Her bridal procession vanished in the grey marches, swallowed by fog and ravens. The guards were found days later, nailed to trees like warnings. The wagons were burned, the priests were flayed and left face down in the heather. And Eowyn was gone. Carthmere blamed Veylmoor. Veylmoor swore innocence. The marches, as always, kept their secrets. Queen Maerwynn responded the way winter responds to spring. She marched. Her army rolled south like a black tide, iron helms, pikes like thorn forests, banners stitched with the crowned wolf of Carthmere. She did not pause to parley. She did not send diplomats. She did not ask for truth. She demanded obedience, and if Veylmoor could not surrender Eowyn, it would surrender everything else. King Odrin called his levies, rivermen, fisherfolk, archers from willow groves. Brave, yes, but brave does not stop plate armor. Brave does not break a disciplined shield wall. Brave does not feed an army when the enemy burns your granaries and salts your fields. Within a month, Maerwynn had taken the border forts. Within 2, she had cut the river trade with iron chains across the water. Within 3, she stood before Veylmoor's capital, Larkspire, and prepared the siege that would starve the city into a grave. The lords of Veylmoor argued themselves hoarse. Some begged Odrin to kneel, some urged a desperate sortie, some whispered of assassins. All of it felt like drowning in slow water. Then a messenger arrived from the east, wearing a cloak that did not quite seem to be there. He came at dusk when the river turned to bruised silver. He brought no banner, no seal, only a small mirror wrapped in black cloth and a single sentence. If you would win without walls breaking, meet us where the world forgets its own reflection. Odrin should have burned the message. He should have called it sorcery and treason and sent for priests. Instead, he stared into the mirror, and for one heartbeat, the glass did not show his face. It showed a dragon's eye. Not the molten gold of old songs, not the ember red of mountain tyrants. This eye was pale as moonlight on ice, and in its pupil the world was reflected twice.
The next night, Odrin left Larkspire with only 3 companions. His bastard nephew, Corvin, a young knight with more courage than caution. Sister Hesta, a river priestess whose prayers tasted of salt and storm. And Lord Merrick, the king's spymaster, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. They traveled east through marsh and thorn until the land rose into the gray marches and the fog thickened like wool. At the place where the world forgets its own reflection, there was a lake, perfectly still, perfectly round. No wind touched it, no bird flew over it. Even the insects seemed to avoid its surface, as if the water were not water, but a hole punched into the sky. On the shore stood figures in cloaks of pale leather, their faces hidden behind masks of polished metal. They did not greet the king, they did not bow, they simply waited, as if time belonged to them. One stepped forward and spoke in a voice like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. "You are late, River King." Odrin bristled. He was a king even in desperation, but he swallowed his pride because Maerwynn's army was a noose tightening day by day. "Who are you?" he demanded, "and what do you want?" The masked figure lifted a hand. In its palm lay a scale the size of a man's hand, thin as a leaf and shimmering. It caught the moonlight and broke it into 1,000 tiny images. Odrin saw his own face in it, and Corvin's, and Hesta's, and Merrick's, all at once, all distorted, all true. "We are the Order of the Looking Worm," the masked figure said. "We have watched your war the way others watch storms. We have waited for you to come because you cannot win with swords." Hesta's fingers tightened round her prayer beads. "Order," she murmured. "A dragon order?" The masked figure inclined his head, almost amused. "Not dragon slayers, not dragon worshippers, dragon riders." At that, Corvin laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "Dragons are dead or sleeping, or stories to frighten children into obedience." The masked rider turned and pointed toward the lake. "Then look." The surface of the lake rippled without wind, the moon's reflection fractured, the water bulged as if something vast moved beneath a thin skin. And then it rose. Not a beast of red scales and smoke, not the familiar terror of legend. This dragon was built of night and mirror. Its scales were pale, almost translucent, each one reflecting the stars. Along its spine ran ridges like shards of crystal. Its wings unfolded with a sound like a cathedral window breaking in slow motion. It did not roar, it whispered. The whisper was not in the ears, it was in the mind, a cold brush of thought against thought. Odrin tasted iron on his tongue. Corvin stumbled back. Even Merrick, the spymaster, went still, as if his many lies had finally met something that could see through them. The masked rider spoke again. "This is a glass-wyrm, mirror-scaled, born in caves where quartz grows like bone. They do not breathe flame, they breathe clarity. They see what is hidden, they show what is denied. They drink secrets the way other dragons drink cattle." Hesta's voice trembled, but she did not retreat. "If you have such beasts, why wait? Why not burn Maerwynn's army and end this?" The masked rider's head tilted. "Because fire makes martyrs. Fire makes songs. We do not make songs. We make endings." Odrin stared at the dragon, at the way the world bent in its scales. "What do you want from me?" The masked rider stepped closer, and for the first time Odrin noticed the smell. Not smoke, not blood, but something like rain on stone. And ink. "A pact," the rider said, "an older vow than your crown. We will lend you our eyes, our wings, our worms. In return, you will give us what we have been denied for a century."
A place at the table of kings, a charter, lands in the marches, and a promise that no lord will hunt our nests as trophies when this war is done. Merrick's smile finally appeared, thin and hungry. "And if we refuse?" The masked rider's voice remained calm. "Then you will be sieged, and you will starve, and your daughter's bones will never be found, and Maerwynn will rule your river and call it justice." Oddrun's heart clenched at the mention of Elowyn. His daughter's laughter had once filled Larkspire's halls like birdsong. Now her name was a wound. He looked at Corvin, at Hesta, at Merrick. Corvin's eyes burned with a reckless hope. Hesta looked as if she were praying not to drown. Merrick looked as if he were calculating the price of every soul present. Oddrun turned back to the masked riders. "What can you do that my spies cannot?" The masked rider raised the shimmering scale. "Your spies creep, they bribe, they bleed for scraps. Our worms fly above the world and listen to the thoughts people think they never speak. They cannot read every mind, not like a god, but they can catch what is reflected, in polished steel, in still water, in a noble's mirror, in a commander's visor. A glass-worm does not need your enemy to confess, it only needs your enemy to look at himself." Oddrun felt the cold weight of that truth. In Maerwynn's camp there would be mirrors, there would be polished armor, there would be water barrels and oil-slicked puddles, there would be 1,000 surfaces to betray the men who stood over them. "And if we agree," Oddrun said, "how do we know you will not betray us?" The masked figure reached up and removed its mask. The face beneath was not monstrous, not ancient. It was a woman's face, weathered by wind and sharp as flint. A scar ran from her brow to her lip, and her eyes were the pale gray of winter rivers. "Because we already have." Oddrun's breath caught. "I am Sir Alice Var," she said, "once sworn to Carthmere, once Maerwynn's own rider, before she tried to have me killed for refusing an order I would not speak aloud." Corvin frowned. Carthmere had dragon riders? Alice's smile was bitter. Not openly, not in the songs. The Order of the Looking Worm served the old kings in secret. We were their unseen scouts, their silent knives. Then Maerwynn came, and she wanted the worms not for watching, but for ruling. She demanded we turn our dragons inward, to spy on her own lords, to blackmail them, to break them. We refused, so she hunted us. She burned our airy caves, she poisoned our hatchlings, she put bounties on our heads and called it cleansing. We survived, and we have been waiting for someone desperate enough to make a king's promise mean something again. Oddrun listened, and something in him shifted. This was not just a bargain, it was an alliance forged in mutual fear and mutual rage. He lifted his chin. "Name your terms, Sir Alice." Alice's eyes flicked to the lake, where the glass-worm hovered like a living reflection. "The pact is simple, River King. You give us sanctuary and legitimacy. You bind it in law, not whispers. We give you what Maerwynn cannot defend against, the truth of her war." They sealed it not with ink, but with breath. Alice drew a narrow blade and cut her palm. Oddrun did the same. Their blood fell onto the shimmering scale, and the scale drank it without dripping, as if it were thirsty. The glass-worm lowered its head, and its whisper slid into Oddrun's mind like cold water. "Promise." Oddrun swallowed. "I promise." The whisper lingered, testing the edges of his intent, then withdrew. And just like that, the war changed shape. The Order did not march with banners, they did not ride at the head of armies, they moved like mist, and their dragons moved like moonlight. In the nights that followed, glass-worms rose from hidden caves and flew over Maerwynn's encampments. They did not cast shadows, their wings caught starlight and scattered it, making them almost impossible to track unless you knew how to look. And what they did was stranger than any battlefield heroics. They watched, they listened, they learned which captains hated each other, which mercenary bands were unpaid, which supply wagons were guarded by boys too tired to keep their eyes open. They learned the passwords that opened the chain gates across the river. They learned, most importantly, that Maerwynn was not here only for Elowyn. She was here for something buried beneath Larkspire. Something old.
On the fourth night, Alice returned to Odrin's hidden tent outside the city. Her cloak was wet with fog, and her eyes were hard. Maerwynn has a map, an old one, drawn by monks who died screaming. It marks the catacombs beneath your palace. Odrin's stomach tightened. Those tunnels were older than the city. The river itself had carved them, and kings had used them as storerooms, prisons, and burial chambers. There were places down there no living man had seen in a century. Why does she want them? Alice hesitated, and in that hesitation, Odrin felt the weight of something dreadful. Because Elowyn is alive, Alice said, and Maerwynn believes your daughter can open a door down there. Hesta, who had been listening in silence, whispered a prayer that sounded like a sob. Odrin's voice broke. How do you know she lives? Alice held out a shard of glass, thin as a nail finger. In it, Odrin saw a reflection that was not his tent, a torchlit chamber, chains, a girl with tangled hair, her face bruised, her eyes still stubbornly bright. Elowyn! Odrin reached for the shard as if he could pull her through it. His fingers trembled. Maerwynn took her, he said. Alice nodded. The marches did not swallow your procession. Carthmere did. They staged the massacre to justify the war. Merrick, the spymaster, exhaled slowly. A clean pretext, a queen's favorite kind. Corvin's hands clenched.
Then we can expose her. We can show her army she's a liar. Alice's gaze sharpened. Exposing her is not enough. Maerwynn's men do not march because they love her. They march because they fear her, and because they are fed. If you want to win without siege, you must make her army collapse under its own weight. You must make her allies doubt. You must make her captains turn. You must make her supply lines rot. And you must do it all before she opens whatever door she's hunting beneath your city. So the war became a game of reflections. The Order taught Odrin's people strange practical lore, interesting facts the songs never mention, the sort of details that make magic feel like craft. They taught that Glass-Wyrms were drawn to purity of surface and repelled by distortion, that a dented helm was a shield against their whisper, while a polished breastplate was an invitation, that still water was a window, but rippling water was a veil, that smoke, oddly enough, could blind them, not because it hid the body, but because it broke reflection into chaos. They taught how to make mirror salt, a powder of ground quartz and river salt that, when scattered, turned any puddle into 1,000 tiny false surfaces. The worms would see too much at once and lose the thread of a thought. And they taught the Rider's creed. Never fight what you can unravel. Never burn what you can loosen. Never kill the king when you can make the king kill himself. Odrin listened, and for the first time since Maerwynn's banners appeared, he felt something like control. The first strike was not against soldiers, it was against certainty. Alice sent a Glass-Wyrm over Maerwynn's war council tent, where the queen met her captains beneath hanging lanterns and polished shields. The worm did not descend, it simply circled, high and silent. Inside, Maerwynn leaned over a map and spoke of the coming assault. Her words were measured, her tone calm. But in the reflections of her captains' helms, the worm caught something else. A twitch in her jaw when one lord spoke, a flash of contempt, a flicker of impatience, a momentary thought, sharp and then cold, reflected in her own mirror-backed goblet. Disposable. The worm carried that thought like a stolen jewel. Alice brought it to Odrin not as a rumor, but as a weapon. They crafted a letter in Maerwynn's own hand, copied perfectly by Merrick's forgers, and sealed it with wax stolen from a courier's pouch. In it, Maerwynn commanded the execution of Lord Halvorn, one of her most respected commanders, accusing him of treachery and failure. The letter was delivered at dawn by a rider wearing Carthmere colors. Halvorn read it. His face went pale.
He laughed once, disbelieving, and then he looked around and saw how many eyes were suddenly measuring his throat. Fear is contagious. By midday, Halvorn had pulled his men back from the siege lines for reorganization. By nightfall, he was gone, riding north with 2,000 soldiers who decided they would rather be deserters than corpses. Maerwynn responded with fury. She hanged 3 messengers and whipped 5 scribes. She demanded loyalty oaths, and every oath she demanded made her look more like a tyrant. The second strike was against food. Glass-Wyrms cannot breathe fire, but they can breathe something else, a cold mist that leaves a surface slick and bright like a fresh mirror. The Order used it on the river at night, coating the iron chains Maerwynn had stretched across the water. When the morning sun rose, the chains gleamed, and in that gleam the worms listened. They heard the chainmaster's pride, the guard captain's boredom, the engineer's plan to tighten the anchors at dusk. That night, Corvin led a small band of rivermen downstream in silence. They scattered mirror salt into the water, making the river glitter with false reflections. The guards' eyes could not settle on any one shape. Corvin's men slipped beneath the chain, cut the anchor ropes, and let the river do what rivers do best. It pulled. The chain snapped like a bell breaking. Maerwynn's supply barges, meant to feed her siege, drifted free and were seized by Veylmoor's hidden boats waiting in reed beds. By the time Maerwynn realized, her army's bread was sailing the wrong direction. Hunger is a quieter enemy than steel. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It makes men look at their queen and wonder if she is worth starving for. The third strike was against Maerwynn's allies. She had hired the Black Boar Company, mercenaries from the western Badlands, brutal men who fought for coin and took payment in advance. They were loyal only to their purses. Alice learned, through a Glass-Wyrm's stolen reflection in a mercenary captain's polished axe head, that Maerwynn planned to withhold their final payment once Larkspear fell, not because she couldn't pay, because she didn't believe in paying wolves after the hunt. Merrick sent word to the Black Boar Company, not as a threat, but as an offer. A single chest of river gold now and safe passage home. The mercenaries took the gold, of course. Then they did something worse than leaving. They switched sides publicly at the edge of Maerwynn's camp, beating their own drums as they marched away, laughing and spitting in the direction of the crowned wolf banner. It wasn't the loss of their blades that hurt Maerwynn most. It was the message. Even hired killers thought her untrustworthy. And still, Maerwynn did not retreat. She tightened the siege. She ordered trenches dug. She brought up rams and towers. She promised her soldiers the wealth of Larkspear. She promised her lords lands along the river. And under it all, she continued her true work. She searched for the catacomb door. Odrin could feel time slipping like sand through fingers. Every night the worms brought him more secrets, more leverage, more ways to unravel Maerwynn's army. But every day Elowyn remained in chains, and every day Maerwynn's engineers inched closer to breaching the outer defenses. Then came the twist that nearly broke the pact. It was Lord Merrick who betrayed them. Not with a dramatic knife in the dark, not with a shouted confession, with a whisper into a mirror. The spy master had always believed himself the smartest man in any room. Now he believed he could be the smartest man in any war. He approached Alice privately and offered her a different pact. "Help me deliver Maerwynn's head," he said, "and I will ensure your order is recognized. Under my oversight, under my rules, you will be a tool of the River Throne, not a power beside it." Alice refused. So Merrick did what men like him always do when refused. He went to Maerwynn. He carried with him the truth of the Glass-Wyrms, the mirror salt, the forged letters, the stolen supply barges. He offered Maerwynn the names of riders and the location of the lake where the pact had been sealed. In return, he demanded one thing: to be named governor of Larkspear when Veylmoor fell. Maerwynn listened, and in her eyes there was something almost like admiration. Then she agreed. That night, Maerwynn's elite scouts, the Wolf Shades, rode through fog toward the lake. They brought nets woven with dull iron rings to distort reflection. They brought torches that burned green with alchemical smoke. They brought priests with hymns meant to shatter enchantment. And they brought a hunter, a man called Brannock Glassbreaker, famous for killing a glass-scaled worm with a hammer of black stone. He wore a cloak stitched with dragon scales, each one cracked and dead, trophies that looked like broken moons. They reached the lake before dawn.
They found the order waiting. Alice stood at the shore, mask on, blade drawn. Behind her, 3 glass worms hovered low, their scales dimmed, their wings held tight. Odrin was not there. He was back at Larkspire, unaware that the Pact's heart was about to be ripped out. The battle at the lake was not a grand clash of armies. It was a brutal, intimate thing. The Wolf Shades threw their iron ring nets. The nets caught on wings and scales, dragging the dragons down, forcing them into the mud. Green smoke filled the air, turning the lake's surface dull and blind. Brannock strode forward and swung his hammer into a dragon's skull. The sound was not a roar. It was a ringing crack, like a mirror breaking in an empty hall. Alice screamed, not in fear, but in fury so sharp it felt like grief. She leapt onto Brannock's back, drove her blade into the gap beneath his arm. He did not fall. He turned, grabbed her by the throat, and slammed her into the shore stones. "You should have stayed dead with your order," he growled. Alice spat blood. "We don't die so easily." In that moment, as her vision blurred, she did what the Order had always done. She used reflection. Even through smoke and nets, there was one surface still clear, Brannock's own trophy scales, cracked but glossy enough to catch the moon. Alice locked her gaze on them and let her mind open. The nearest glass worm, half trapped in mud, felt her intent. It breathed thin mist across the broken scales on Brannock's cloak. For a heartbeat, the cracks filled with shine. And in that shine, Brannock saw himself, not as a hero, as a butcher. He saw the dragon he had killed long ago and the way it had looked at him, not with hatred, but with something like understanding. His grip loosened, just slightly, just enough. Alice tore free, grabbed Brannock's hammer with both hands, and drove its black head into his knee. He fell with a howl. The Order's remaining riders surged forward. Blades flashed, nets were cut. A glass worm, wounded and furious, beat its wings hard enough to clear the smoke for an instant. Moonlight struck the lake, and the lake became a mirror again. In that sudden clarity, the worms did what they were born to do. They showed the Wolf Shades their own fear. Not a magical compulsion, not mind control like a child's tale, something subtler, more human. The soldiers saw in their own reflections on the water the faces they would wear as corpses. They saw their queen's cold eyes looking past them. They saw that they were pawns. And pawns, when they realize they are pawns, sometimes run. The Wolf Shades broke. They fled into the fog, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead behind. But the Order had paid dearly. One glass worm lay still at the lake's edge, its mirror scales dulled, its eye clouding. Alice knelt beside it, pressed her forehead to its brow. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I promised you sanctuary." By the time Odrin learned what had happened, the sun was rising red over Larkspire, and Maerwynn's siege engines were moving into place, and Merrick was gone. The betrayal hit Odrin like a fist to the ribs. The spymaster had been at his side for years, advising, smiling, smoothing over scandals like oil on water. Now he had sold them all for a title. Corvin wanted to ride out and hunt him. Hesta wanted to pray. Odrin wanted to scream until the river itself answered.
Alice arrived at the city gates, bloodied, exhausted, carrying the broken mask of a fallen rider. She did not beg. She did not accuse. She simply looked at Odrin with eyes that had seen too much. The pact is bleeding, but it is not dead. Odrin swallowed his rage and his grief and forced his voice steady. Can you still help me save my daughter? Alice's jaw tightened. Yes, but not with tricks alone. Maerwynn knows now that we are here. She will harden her camp. She will dull her armor. She will ban mirrors. She will stir every puddle. She will burn smoke day and night. The worms will see less. So we must strike where she cannot blind herself, inside her own certainty. Odrin stared at the siege lines. He could hear the creak of wood, the rumble of wheels, the distant shouts of soldiers preparing to bring the city to its knees. What do you propose? Alice's voice dropped. We take Maerwynn's war away from her. We make her believe she has already won, and then we let her victory devour her. They devised a final gambit, one so dangerous it felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting the air to become ground. They would give Maerwynn what she wanted, the catacomb door. Not truly, not fully, but enough to lure her into the underworld beneath Larkspire, where reflections were everywhere, wet stone, underground pools, polished bones of old kings. Alice said the Glass-Wyrms could see there even through smoke, because darkness itself becomes a mirror when water is present. They needed bait. They needed Ilowen. Saving her was not only mercy, it was strategy. Corvin volunteered to lead the rescue. Hesta insisted on coming, her river prayers steadying her hands. Alice chose 2 riders and a single Glass-Wyrm, small enough to slip through the night unseen. They entered the catacombs through a forgotten well, descending into cold air that tasted of earth and old coins. The tunnels were lined with carvings of river gods and crowned kings, their faces worn smooth with time. At the heart of the underworld, they found Maerwynn's hidden chamber. Ilowen hung in chains, pale but alive, her eyes snapping to them with fierce, disbelieving hope. Corvin moved to free her. Then the chamber's torches flared, and Queen Maerwynn stepped from the shadows. She wore no crown down here, only a simple circlet of iron. Her armor was dull, deliberately unpolished, clever. Her eyes were bright as frost. You came, she said softly. Of course you did. Corvin raised his sword. Where is Merrick? Maerwynn's smile was thin. Your spymaster is exactly what he always was, a man who thinks information makes him immortal. She glanced at Ilowen. Did you truly believe I took the girl only to bait your father? No, she is a key. Her bloodline is older than your river throne, Odrin's whelp. It ties to the first stones of this city. Hesta stepped forward, loud but trembling. You will not use her. Maerwynn's gaze slid to Hesta, dismissive. I already have. And then the real twist revealed itself. Ilowen, chained and bruised, lifted her head and smiled. Not at Corvin, at Maerwynn. Corvin froze. Ilowen's voice was hoarse but steady. I told you they would come. Hesta staggered as if struck. No, child. Ilowen's eyes were hard now, not the bright innocence Odrin remembered. There was something else in them, something sharpened by captivity into purpose. Maerwynn had not only held her, she had spoken to her, fed her poison slowly, like honeyed wine. Ilowen continued, her gaze fixed on Corvin. My father would rather bargain with dragon witches than kneel and save our people. He would rather let the river drown in blood than admit he is weak. Corvin's voice cracked. Ilowen, we came for you. She laughed once bitter. You came for a symbol. Maerwynn stepped closer, and her voice became almost tender. You see, Even the river princess understands. The world is not saved by walls. It is saved by those willing to do what must be done. Corvin's sword wavered. Alice behind him did not move. Her eyes were on Maerwynn, calculating. And the Glass-Wyrm, crouched low near an underground pool, watched everything in silence. Maerwynn raised a hand toward the far wall, where an ancient stone door was carved with river runes.
"Open it, Elowyn." Elowyn's chained hands trembled. She inhaled, as if gathering courage, and began to speak words older than the kingdom itself. The runes glowed faintly. The stone door shuddered. Alice whispered, barely audible, "Now." The Glass-Wyrm exhaled, not mist, a breath of perfect clarity that turned the underground pool into a flawless mirror. And in that mirror, Maerwynn saw herself, not as queen, as a child, kneeling before a burning, airy cave, watching dragon eggs crack and die because of orders she had given. She saw the faces of the riders she had betrayed. She saw Alice standing over her with a blade, not in hatred, but in judgment. Marwyn's breath caught just for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, Alice moved. She did not strike Maerwynn. She struck the chain holding Elowyn. The iron link snapped. Elowyn stumbled forward, free. Corvin caught her, holding her as if she might vanish. Elowyn thrashed, screaming, but Hesta gripped her face gently, forcing her to look into the mirror pool. "Look," Hesta whispered, voice thick with tears. "Look at what she made you." Elowyn's eyes flicked to the reflection, and there in the water she saw herself too, not as a princess, as a tool, a key, a girl repeating someone else's words. The spell on the door faltered, the runes dimmed. Marwyn's composure shattered. "You ungrateful—" She lunged, but Corvin blocked her, steel meeting steel in the cramped chamber. Sparks flew. Maerwynn fought like a woman who had never been told no, her blade precise, relentless. Alice joined, not with brute force, but with cunning, driving Maerwynn back toward the mirror pool again and again, forcing her to face reflections she had spent years trying to control. Above them, the siege continued, but down here, in the bones of the city, the war's true heart was beating. Maerwynn realized, too late, what Odrin and the Order were doing. They weren't trying to kill her, they were trying to break her hold on her own army. Because while she fought in the underworld, Odrin unleashed the final weapon the Glass-Wyrms had gifted him. Truth delivered at the right moment is more devastating than any catapult. In Marwyn's camp, 100 polished helms and goblets and shield bosses suddenly caught the same reflection at once, a Glass-Wyrm circling overhead, its scales scattering moonlight like coins. And in those surfaces, the soldiers saw something impossible. Maerwynn, beneath Larkspire, fighting not to conquer, but to open an ancient door. They saw Lord Merrick kneeling beside her like a dog. They saw Elowyn in chains. They saw, most damning of all, Maerwynn speaking the words that would ruin her forever. "I took the girl. I burned the wagons. I needed a reason." The Wyrms did not invent that confession. They had caught it weeks ago in the reflection of Marwynn's own mirror, spoken in private to Merrick when she believed herself alone. Now it spread through the camp like plague. Men turned to each other, mouths dry. "We're starving for a lie. We're dying for her ambition. We're besieging a city because she wanted a door." Commanders argued, priests shouted, mercenaries laughed. The lords who had already doubted her now had proof to feed their doubt. Lord Halvorn's desertion no longer looked like cowardice, it looked like wisdom. By dawn, Marwynn's army did something armies rarely do. It stopped being an army. It became a crowd of hungry men with weapons, all deciding at once that they did not want to die for a queen who kidnapped brides and lied about it. In the catacombs, Maerwynn felt it before anyone told her. Power is a thing rulers sense the way sailors sense weather. Her blade slowed. Her eyes widened. "No,"
she whispered.
Alice pressed her advantage, forcing Maerwynn back until her heel touched the mirror pool's edge. "You wanted to rule by watching everyone," Alice said, voice low. "Now be watched." Maerwynn's gaze darted to Elowyn, who was shaking in Corvin's arms, sobbing as Hesta murmured prayers into her hair. Maerwynn's face hardened into something like grief, quickly buried. "This world belongs to those who take it," she hissed. Then she stepped backward into the pool. The water should have been shallow. It wasn't. The mirror surface swallowed her like a mouth. For an instant, her hand broke the surface, fingers clawing at air. In that moment, she looked up at Alice, and there was something human in her eyes at last. Not fear of death, fear of being forgotten. Then she was gone. The pool stilled. The reflections returned, calm and indifferent. Corvin stared, trembling. "Is she dead?" Alice's face was unreadable. "There are places beneath the world where mirrors lead," she said. She sought doors. Perhaps she found one. Hesta tightened her hold on Elowyn. "Let it take her." They fled the catacombs before the old stones could decide to collapse. They emerged into morning light to find Larkspire's gates still standing, unbroken, and Maerwynn's camp in chaos. King Audrin stood on the walls, staring at the enemy lines dissolving like fog. He saw banners lowered not in surrender, but in retreat. He saw soldiers throwing down pikes to run faster. He saw lords riding away, their entourages scattering. He saw, carried on the wind, the sound of a war ending without the usual last scream. When Elowyn was brought to him, Audrin's knees nearly gave out. He held her as if she were still a child small enough to lift, and she clung to him with the desperate strength of someone waking from a nightmare. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I thought she was right. She made it sound like you didn't care." Audrin closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked older than his crown. "I should have come sooner," he said. I should have. Alice watched from a distance, her expression softened by something like quiet relief. Corvin approached her later when the city was exhilarating in exhausted disbelief. "You won," he said. Alice shook her head. "We survived. There's a difference." "And what of your pact?" Corvin asked. "Will my uncle keep it?" Alice's gaze went to the river, glittering under the sun like a blade laid flat. "He must," she said, "because now he knows what it costs when a ruler breaks faith." King Audrin did keep it, at least in ink. He granted the order lands in the Grey Marches, a charter recognizing them as a sovereign knightly order, neither outlaw nor tool. He forbade the hunting of Glass-Wyrms on pain of death. He allowed their aeries to be guarded by river law. The lords grumbled, the priests muttered. The common folk told stories with nervous laughter about dragons that watched you through your own cup. But peace held. For a while. Because the world does not like a secret that becomes public. In the months that followed, polished armor fell out of fashion. Nobles demanded dull goblets. Mirrors were covered with cloth in Carthmere and Veylmoor alike. People stirred their bathwater before speaking. They learned instinctively to fear their own reflection. And the Order of the Looking Worm became both revered and resented, a necessary shadow at the edge of every throne room. As for Maerwynn, her body was never found. Carthmere's lords declared her dead, of course. They crowned a cousin. They offered peace, eager to forget the queen who had brought them so close to ruin. But in the Grey Marches, shepherds began to whisper of a woman seen at dusk near still pools, her eyes pale as moonlight, her voice carried strangely on the wind. They said she spoke to her own reflection as if it answered back. They said sometimes the water would ripple, and beneath it something vast and shimmering would move. And Sir Alice Varr, when asked if she believed those tales, would only say this: "Mirrors don't just show you what is, they show you what could be. And some people, once they've seen that, will tear kingdoms apart to reach it. So remember the lesson of the Glass-Wyrm Pact. Walls can be broken, armies can be starved, kings can be slain, but the most dangerous weapon in any realm is the truth, seen at the wrong angle, reflected at the right time, carried on silent wings. Because if a dragon can steal your secrets from your own polished steel, then the greatest siege is not against stone.
it is against the mind. And the moment you begin to fear your own reflection, you've already surrendered something you may never win back.